So we'll now move to the third session, which would be on the future of app growth and driving conversions beyond the install. With more and more apps, with more than 4 million plus apps in the app stores, I think getting one's app noticed today is a massive challenge. And with more than 50% of them making less than $500 a month, app developers and marketers are actually recognizing the need to go beyond the first installation. To take forward this session, we have with us Tejal Parekh. Tejal, if you could join us on the stage. Tejal oversees the product marketing for mobile app ads at Facebook and focuses on the developer ecosystem. Prior to Facebook, she was the vice president of marketing at HackerRank, where she was responsible for all aspects of marketing, from brand and product strategy to customer acquisition. She is a seasoned marketing executive with enterprise software marketing experience at Google and Salesforce, and is passionate about technologies enabling developers and marketers. She has an MBA from the Chicago booth and lives in San Francisco. Over to you, Tejal. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here. Very excited. This is first time at NASSCOM, just like Carl, so super excited to be here. Especially as somebody who oversaw marketing for a developer platform, very excited to be here with developers as well. So just like any good marketer would, I want to take a pulse of the audience. If your business has an app today, or you're likely to have one, raise your hand. Good. That's a fair amount of interest. How many of you are in B2C space? And how many of you are startups? Wow, this is a good distribution across various segments, as well as just good to see the amount of interest in the apps today. So if you're in the app space, you know that there are over 4 million apps available in various app stores today. And just to give you some perspective, this number was only 1.5 million just 3 years ago. So we know that the market is growing tremendously. It's maturing, and we're using apps far more than we did just last year or the year before. In fact, if we look at some of the stats from the Mary Meeker report here, you can see that a typical app user is expected to install 37 apps today, which is 10 more than last year, just when we thought that we had hit the peak in terms of app growth. We're expected to spend 4 to 5 hours on our cell phones. Again, at least hour and a half more compared to last year. In fact, I bet, and I don't have any data on this, just based on personal experience, the average age of an app user is also rapidly declining. These are my 2 boys, 6 and 7. These are just a handful of apps that they've been using over the last 2 years to do math, to learn logic, to solve coding challenges. Yes, they are into that as well. But I think this is applicable for all of us as well. We use apps for personal finance, to stay up to date on our work projects. We use Slack. So it's gone far beyond social media and messaging. And with all this growth comes the increase in competition. The competition has grown really intense, and this is just to give you a sense of what it's like. These are the iOS numbers I pulled just last week. And you can see that in the month of August alone, 1 month, there were over 400,000 app submissions. The average that's running today on iOS, more than 11,000 apps a day, which is huge. And we know from experience that only a very, very, very small fraction of these apps will make it. So here's, again, some more staggering data. We know that more than half of these apps make less than $500 a month, which means they're going to go to app graveyard very soon. So the benefit of all this growth is experienced by a very small fraction of apps. The apps with intelligence, the apps with marketing smarts. So for the rest of the talk, I want to talk about how these guys, how these top performing successful apps are differentiating themselves. As a marketer myself, as somebody who's marketed apps, as well as now owning this business at Facebook, I understand we get to see data at a much higher level. And based on that, we can tell what are some of these most successful apps doing that's differentiating them. So for starters, if you're a startup, or if you're just launching an app, then I think your best bet is to go with the organic channels, such as word of mouth, or email marketing, or even free sharing on various social media platforms. And what that does is it gives you a sense for your product market fit. It tells you what nuances you need to figure out, what nuances you need to take care of in terms of just getting that initial traction. But once you have that proof point that yes, your app is being adopted by your users, once you know that you're getting traction and getting that inflection point in growth, that's when it's time to think about scale. That's when it's time to think about investing in paid acquisition, because it is one of the best ways to get to scale a lot faster. So I want to talk about what characteristics, well, first, what trends are driving the innovation in paid acquisitions, as well as what characteristics are differentiating the most successful apps when they run their paid acquisitions. So first up, it's about thinking beyond just the install acquisitions. Too often, we hear from startup marketers where they will think about their campaigns, marketing campaigns or install campaigns, and they will think about their acquisition channels in terms of, oh, I'm getting the lowest cost per installation, CPI. I'm getting the lowest CPI here, so I'm going to invest in that. And that's how they measure the effectiveness of their program. But if you think about it, install is just the first step in the journey. Most startup marketers, or we've seen this even in some of the bigger companies, where they go after install as a primary measure because it's the easiest and the quickest way to get it, but it's worth investing into figuring out what your entire user journey looks like within your app. For example, this is an e-commerce example here where you can see that you need to understand which of your users are installing your app, which of these guys are then going to your product page, adding the product to the shopping cart, and then finally making the purchase. For a gaming app, it might be something a little different where you're looking at how many of these guys are playing the games, the frequency with which they're playing the games, the levels that they're crossing, and finally making that in-app purchase. By doing this, you're essentially trying to figure out your entire conversion funnel, if you will, and this gives you a sense for what are the various drop-off points, what are the conversion points that you need to optimize to be able to drive those users continually down the funnel to get them to take the action. But more importantly, because we're talking about paid acquisition, it's crucial that you take a look at this map or journey as far as your users are concerned and figure out the long-term value from those installs. Think about the full value that you're getting from your app users and which of your acquisition channels are giving you the most high-value installs. So the key takeaway from this is think about long-term value, think about the channels that are giving you the most long-term value, and measure your ROI based on that. The second big differentiator that we see in the app space today, especially in the app marketing space today, is around optimization for events that are more relevant. What do I mean by that? So we at Facebook have been in the app space for some time now, and we have learned from experience that over 77% of users are lost within the first week for a typical app. That's a boatload of people that we are losing. We spend so much money acquiring these people, and a majority of them are getting lost in the very first week. And this staggering stat is very important for our industry. So as a result of that, more and more advertisers or advertising platforms are now thinking about how can they offer performance-based marketing models where you as an app marketer or app advertiser can actually bid for or optimize your campaigns for events that are most relevant to you, such as purchases or bookings. Along these lines, at Facebook as well, earlier this year, we announced something called App Event Optimization. But you can, if you're an app marketer, you can think about this as you've spent enough time and resources doing your acquisition campaigns, and you've finally figured out what acquisitions are doing or what your installs are doing within your app and which one of these events are most important to you. Now it's time to think about running campaigns where you are acquiring users that are most likely to take those actions within your app. So this is a newer trend that we are seeing in app marketing, and this is something that the most successful apps, the most revenue-generating apps, we can see that they're quickly pivoting towards this once they've amassed enough acquisitions. The third pro tip that I'll share with you that, again, differentiates more successful marketers is around creatives, making the most use of your creative formats. And I talked earlier about how hyper-competitive this space is. Now, to stand out in a competitive space like this, you need to engage your audience with creatives that will truly capture their attention and give them a much deeper preview of your app. And there are several ways to do this. In just the last 2 years, our industry has seen a variety of different formats that have come up, which wasn't the case just about 2 years ago. Let's start with video here. Too often I hear from startup marketers and startup developers that videos are too time intensive, so they shy away from it. But if you knew that videos typically have 80% better conversion compared to any other format, then that's something worth investing in. That's something worth experimenting with, especially if your app lends itself, if your app is visually rich and lends itself to a video creative, it's definitely worth investing in that format. Similarly, Carousel, a relatively new format, again, came out last year. More than a single static image ad gives you the ability to showcase multiple areas of your app to your users, again, giving them a deeper preview. I want to spend a couple more seconds on Canvas as a format. It's one of the more recent formats, and it's one of my favorite formats because it just lends itself to such beautiful creatives. And you can see that. Let's hope the video works here. This is a recent ad from Target, and you can see, very appropriate for the upcoming holiday season. But you can see it gives you a much deeper preview of what you can do with the app. But more importantly, it's such a deeply immersive experience. It gives you that full screen ad experience. The stickiness of this format is so compelling that we've seen a typical user will spend 31 seconds interacting with a Canvas ad, which is far, far higher than any static image ads that you would see. So again, something worth investing in. And the last bit is, if your app or business has a product catalog, then think about the dynamic ads where you can serve up the right ads or right products to the right users at the right time. This is an example from Lazada. Lazada is based in Singapore, sells housewares, and we saw that when they started to use the creatives using the dynamic ads, they were able to target the right people, show them the right product, and their cost per installation or overall acquisition cost went down by more than double-digit percent point, which is huge by just switching to a different format. So key takeaway, don't settle for single image static ads or static creatives. Expand your horizons and think about what are some of the other ways you can draw in that audience. Now, let's talk about re-engagement. This is something that we're seeing again as a big shift in the last year or so, especially as we think about apps. It's a powerful lever, and as you start to acquire more and more users, this is something that is going to become more and more critical for you. As app marketers, we spend a ton of resources, a ton of budget acquiring users and then gathering data on these users, gathering data on their behavior. So we have a lot of raw material to work with. If you're thinking about re-engagement then, we can leverage all that raw data. And here are some of the examples, very easy examples that you can think about in terms of re-engagement. If you have a B2B app, I saw some hands go up earlier. If you have a B2B app, and if your app does better, performs better, when the user has not just installed your app, but also registered for it and filled out the profile and whatnot, then you can choose a target audience for retargeting as the cohort that has just installed your app but hasn't registered yet. Serve them up with either a timely ad or timely push notification, and that should help you push these guys to take the desired action. Same thing with the social apps as well. Get your users to fill out the profile by serving them gentle, friendly reminders. And then finally, this I think is done very well by a lot of e-commerce apps where if you've added a product to a shopping cart, then you keep getting reminders to finally make that purchase. I'm an avid shoe shopper, confession, and every week I will get reminders from a variety of shoe shopping apps where I've just added shoes to various shopping carts to finally make that purchase. And this is something that is so tactical if you think about it, but is so crucial when you want to get the maximum value from that user. So again, here's another example of how important re-engagement can be. Here's an example from Zindagi Games, recently acquired by Zynga. And they ran their re-engagement campaign for this game called Crazy Kitchen. They had two cohorts. One cohort where they looked at people who had played the game in the last 7 days, and the other cohort where they looked at people who had played the game and bought something, made an in-app purchase over the last 180 days. By just targeting these two cohorts, they were able to see more than 10% improvement in sales as well as 4 times the return on spend. So again, hugely important if you're thinking about growing your app, growing the revenue, because unlocking the full value of an app happens over time, and it happens with continued usage. So again, very critical to think about re-engagement as a tactic in your overall growth strategy. And the last point I'll make is around experiment, analyze, iterate. This is, I think, applicable to everything that we do, not just marketing. But I think when you're thinking about marketing campaigns, this is very, this becomes crucial because it's important to run a large number of experiments so that you gather enough data points to truly understand what's going on with your audience. There's almost this virtuous cycle that, of experimentation and measurement and iteration that keeps getting better and better as you continue to experiment more. So make sure that you're running enough experiments or enough campaigns to truly tease out the differences in terms of what audiences are working better, what geographies are converting better and such. Also, try and invest in analytic tools, the right analytic tools. Too often we'll see the startup marketers or early stage marketers who'll run campaigns and who'll just, like I had mentioned earlier, who'll just look at CPI that is being shown to them in their advertising platform, whatever platform they might be using. But as I mentioned earlier, unless you invest in the right analytics tool and unless you invest in the right instrumentation processes and whatnot, you're not going to be able to tell what the full value of that install is or the full conversion of that campaign is. So invest in the right tools so that you can truly understand where this is going, what the true effectiveness is. Again, this is another benefit from investing in the right analytics tools. You can get a whole host of intelligent information about your campaigns, including geographies, audiences, as well as what kind of devices and platforms are helpful. So with that, I just want to recap the 5 key points that you should think about as you plan the growth strategy for your app. Think about not just the install, but what the full lifetime value of every install will be. Make sure that you understand what events are relevant and try to add that to your marketing campaigns as a tactic to optimize around events and not just install. Think about more than just static single image ads. Make the most out of your creative formats. Make sure that you continue to do re-engagement, because if you are in it for the long haul, you want to make sure that you're getting the most out of the users that you've already spent a lot of resources acquiring. And finally, experiment, analyze, and iterate. With that, I will end it here, and happy to take any questions. We have 4 more minutes. Yes, back there.
Thank you so much. That was really insightful. My name is Ankur, and I represent a company which is into B2B side of apps, into HR space. The question I want to pose here is that everything that you mentioned is good, but how do you ensure technology adoption when it comes to apps? Because user is the chooser, right?
You're talking about user adoption?
Yeah.
Yes, that's a tricky one. Having been at a startup myself, you know, there's a lot of nuances that that go into it. But I think I'll actually go back to something that Carl mentioned earlier, and I agree with Carl on this, where you know, we try to go after, oftentimes we see startups go after, you know, huge market, lots and lots of use cases. But if you just hone in on one thing first and try to go after the audience that fits that particular niche, then you start to add on to that. And that's how you drive adoption. But you need to first find that initial niche, if you will, that will adopt the first iteration of your product.
Sure.
Yes. I'll repeat your question. How do we, so the question is, CPI for iOS are going up to $4 now, and how do we ensure that it doesn't reach the stratosphere? We're in it as well. That's the same problem that we try to solve as well at Facebook. I don't think that, I think there are several strategies that app marketers can use. One is think about expanding beyond the geography that you might have already targeted. Think about other audiences. Beyond that, there are other ways to think about it as well. Like I said, think about beyond the install, not just the install, but which of these guys are converting better. And in those cases, you might find that even though you're paying more for that install, those installs are worth far more than what you're paying. And this is actually very interesting. I hadn't thought about this earlier until I started running app ad marketing at Facebook, is when talking to, and I don't know if this is segment specific, but when talking to a lot of gaming developers, gaming app developers, we had asked this question where, what's that roof for you? What's the ceiling? And surprisingly, we got the answer, as long as it's ROI positive, we don't mind spending on that acquisition. So that was, again, very interesting way of looking at it. Not something that I would adhere to, because like I said, at Facebook, we're constantly striving to keep it low. I think that's it. One last question? Yes. Do we have time? I saw this move.
Just a quick question. Both the stores, the Play Store and the App Store, don't tell you when a user uninstalls. So you know how many people installed, but you really don't know how many are actively using your app. So other ways where we can, figure out adoption, or queue the user to see if they're actually adopting or they're not.
Are you using analytics tools? Any analytics tools?
Not at the moment.
There's a bunch of them. That's why I was talking about investing in the right analytics tools. Shameless plug, Facebook Analytics, free to use, but you can also invest in some of the other paid tools that will get you that information in terms of adoption, usage, how many times these users are coming back, and that whole funnel that I talked about, that was just for conversion. But when I ran marketing at my previous startup, we used to look at funnels in terms of how many users are coming in, repeat users, and we had a whole host of things to answer exactly these questions. But you need the analytics tools and invest in the right instrumentation for that. So make it a priority to invest in the right analytic tools.
Cool, thanks.
Right, I think that's it.
Any other questions? Oh, there is
Should we
one.
take that?
Okay, we'll take that one.
I have to say, very, very thrilled that you guys have all these questions on apps. Gives me enough fodder to go back and work with.
Good morning. Very nice talk. We recently launched an app, actually, which is first time in the world, a linguistic email address known as data mail. So you can have an email address in the language you want. The challenge, very recently, so not a challenge which is not yet tried to solve, but I think this is a challenge that because we are solving a lot of linguistic areas, and the app stores do not allow you to upload the videos in each language. So basically, if I'm targeting in Russian, and I have only one option to upload a video in English or something, whereas I'm targeting that language. So this is one challenge which we are seeing. And secondly, when the app is free for anyone, so anybody can search and download that data mail from both the app stores, do you really think for the app like that, which is unique and if somebody will search a linguistic address, this is the only app available. So is this the paid subscription, paid advertising model is also recommended for these kind of models, or just the organic growth is fine?
So let me answer the first question. I'll come to the second one. And I'll actually ask you to summarize the second one again. But the first question was around the challenge with respect to not being able to upload videos in multiple languages on Google Play as well as iOS stores. iOS and Google Play can't really talk much about those two. They have their own system set up, but I'm just thinking on my feet here, but I think one way to address that would be to, as you're thinking about your acquisition programs or campaigns, maybe target people speaking a certain language by uploading the video in that language. Because with, at least I know with Facebook you can do that. If you're targeting Russians, you can upload the video in Russian and then target everybody that speaks Russian. So that's one hack to solve it. But if Google or iOS does not allow you to upload videos in multiple languages, not sure how I could, yeah, that can be a challenge. Second question, if you can just summarize that for me.
Is it through Facebook or through somebody?
Got it. Oh, okay.
It's a unique word, right, kind of.
Got it. So the question is, if it's a free app, does it make sense to use paid acquisition model? I think it depends on what you're trying to get out of that free app. Eventually, I'm assuming that all those free users are going to convert and lead to some money-making event for you. And if that is the case, then absolutely, you should think about paid acquisition because it is going to eventually lead to some ROI for you. I think the only case where it might not be recommended is something like Khan Academy. People here familiar with Khan Academy?
Yes.
Good. So I don't think that they are in it for making money because even after continued usage, you're not necessarily seeing those prompts where the app starts to make money. In those cases, probably doesn't make sense to invest in paid acquisition because you're not necessarily going to get the ROI. So I think in your case, if there is eventually some kind of money-making event, some monetization event, it absolutely makes sense to use paid acquisition, especially as you start to hit scale. Thank you.
Good.
All right, I think that sums it up. Thank you again. I'll be around. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tejal. And before you leave the stage, thank you very much once again, and a small token of appreciation on behalf of NASSCOM. Thank you. And